Hi folks, welcome to AP Bio Fun with Dr. D. This is the video of the first part of a two-part series on the nature of science, and we're going to be talking about claim, hypothesis, and prediction. Why are we talking about this? What's the difference between these three terms? Well, one important reason that we're talking about it is because often hypothesis and predictions are mixed up. Sometimes claim and hypothesis are mixed up, and often both teachers and students are confused. You may even find some textbooks that have it wrong, but this is what is going to be expected of you on the AP exam, to know the difference between a claim and a hypothesis and a prediction. And this is what is going to be expected of you if you're a student in an AP Bio class or if in your biology college class. And the differences between these terms really are important because they tell you something about the nature of science, how scientific experimentation works, and scientific argumentation, how scientists draw conclusions. So let's get started. And we're gonna start with one of my favorite quotes by one of our favorite neighborhood scientists. You know, he worked in Princeton, close to where we are. So Albert Einstein said, "I am neither clever nor especially gifted. I'm only very, very curious." And I want you to remember this because many studies have shown that the biggest predictor of success is curiosity. In other words, if you're curious, then you're motivated to find answers to your questions. That's what curious means. And if you're motivated to find answers to your questions and to solve problems, then you will be learning and growing for the rest of your life. And I want you to remember that every scientific experiment really starts with a question. Sometimes we have a hypothesis. That means we think we know what the answer is, you know, and sometimes we don't. Scientists make statements based on evidence. We can make simple statements about simple questions, or we can build models, which are larger statements that are attempting to explain a phenomenon. But let's start with something simple. So how do we make statements based on evidence? Let's examine this scenario. Three friends are traveling through Scotland. This is their first visit to the country, and they've never been to Scotland. And as they travel through the Scottish countryside by train, they notice a sheep in a nearby field. The first friend says, "Aha, I see that Scottish sheep are black." The second friend, however, says, "You mean that some Scottish sheep are black, right?" And the third friend says, No. All we really know is that there's at least one sheep in Scotland, and that at least one of its side is black. Now, I want you to pause this video and think. What do you think about these three statements that the three men made? And which one do you think could be considered a statement of truth, a statement of fact? Which of these three statements? I really encourage you to pause the video and think about this. And after you've had a chance to do that, we will go on to discuss claim, hypothesis, and prediction. Okay, so what's a claim and what is a hypothesis? When you have a guess what the answer to your question is, we call that a hypothesis. However, I'm putting guess in quotation marks because really a hypothesis is not a random guess. It really isn't. It is based on prior knowledge. Now that knowledge may come from either observations or from prior experiments. We have done some experiments, we've collected some data, and based on these experiments, we formulate a hypothesis that can be further tested. A claim is an answer to your question. It really is a statement of something as a fact or an assertion of truth. For that reason, a claim is always based on evidence. Now, what is the difference between hypothesis and prediction? And I'm going to say it again, that you may have been taught wrong, and you may have even read it wrong in some textbooks. There is a difference. And in schools, you were asked to write hypotheses in the form of if-then statements. These are actually predictions. They're not hypotheses. Okay? So here are two statements. Let's read them out loud and let's think a little bit about it. Can you sort them out? Can you spot which one's which? Which one is a hypothesis and which one is a prediction? If I place a plant closer to the window, it'll grow more than the plant away from the window. The second statement being, the greater amount of light a plant receives, the more it will grow. Which one do you think is a claim? Which one is a prediction? Or are they both predictions? Or are they both, sorry, not claim, hypotheses. Which one is a hypothesis and which one is a prediction? Pause the video and think about it. It is important to distinguish between a hypothesis and a prediction. All if-then statements are prediction. Why? Because they predict what will happen if you do something. If I do this, then this is going to happen. But you need to be careful because not all predictions start with if-then. Let's go back to our two statements. If I place a plant closer to the window, it will grow more than the plant I place away from the window. Now, I just told you that if-then statements are predictions, but also let's think about this. What am I doing here? I use two plants and I'll place one close to the window and one will be placed away from the window. And then I'm going to see how much they grow in a given amount of time. So this is an experiment. I'm setting up an experiment and I'm predicting what's going to happen at the end of the experiment. And that's exactly what this is. It's a prediction because I'm predicting what is going to happen if I do this. Let's look at the second statement. The greater amount of light a plant receives, the more it will grow. This sounds very much like a hypothesis. But in truth, it is a prediction. Why is it a prediction? Because even though I am not doing any experimentation, I am predicting what's going to happen if a plant receives different amounts of light. The greater the light, the more growth. The less the light, the less growth. So this is sort of like a hypothetical experiment, or it could be an observational experiment. I'm observing plants under different light conditions, and I predict that the plants that will receive more light will grow more than the plants that will receive less light. So again, this is a prediction. Both of these statements predict what will happen if something is being done to the plant. Predictions really state the outcome of a plant or a hypothetical experiment or observation. So the second statement really is a prediction of either a hypothetical experiment or really an observation. Okay, so a hypothesis really is a type of model. And you know what models are. Models aim to explain data from observations and experiments. Now, like any model, a hypothesis needs to be put to the test. Is this model complete? Is it accurate? Do we need to revise it? Do we need to add to it? Hypotheses, models are tested in multiple ways in order to obtain a lot of strong evidence, or not, because sometimes they turn out not to be true, to make a claim. Remember, a claim is a statement of fact, a statement of truth, or not. And the claim could be as simple as, my model is complete and accurate. My hypothesis is true. I just told you that models and hypotheses have to be tested in multiple ways. We need to obtain multiple pieces of evidence. That means multiple experiments are usually performed in order to obtain strong evidence that the hypothesis is correct. From this, it follows that one hypothesis can generate multiple predictions. Now, in a simple high school lab, usually we don't do this, but scientific experimentation involves multiple experiments being performed to test a model or a hypothesis. That means multiple predictions are being made, not just one, multiple. And here is a very simple example. Okay. So our hypothesis here is plants require sunlight to grow. Notice that the hypothesis here is made in the form of a statement, just like a claim, a statement of truth, except this is our hypothesis. We need to prove it. Not prove it, but we need to obtain strong support for it. So our hypothesis is that plants require sunlight to grow. Based on this hypothesis, we can generate multiple predictions. And again, predictions predict what will happen if we initiate some experiments. So if I place a plant near a window, it will grow taller than a plant that is placed further away from the window. So this is a prediction based on an experiment where we would place one plant by the window and one plant away from the window. And then we measure their growth after a certain amount of time. We predict that the one by the window will grow more. Now, this may not happen, but that's our prediction based on the hypothesis that plants require sunlight to grow. A second prediction we can make is that if we place a plant in some kind of a dark cabinet with no sunlight whatsoever, this plant will not grow at all. So if sunlight is required for plants to grow, if we take away all sunlight from a plant, it will not grow. I can make yet another prediction. If I place plants at different distances from a light source, the plants that are closest to the light source will grow the most, and the plants that are furthest away from the light source will grow the least. And so on and so on. I don't have to stop at 3 predictions. Furthermore, I can also make observational predictions. Remember, we can collect data not only from experiments, but also from observations. So I can predict, if the hypothesis is true that plants require sunlight to grow, I can predict that plants that are near the equator are going to be really tall, really green, lots of leaves. So they're going to be very luscious and very tall compared to plants that grow near the poles, the North Pole and the South Pole. Why? Because I know that the equator receives much more sunlight than the North Pole or the South Pole. A second observational prediction I can make is that plants will grow less in winter than they do in summer. That is based on my prior knowledge that in winter the daylight there are fewer hours of daylight in winter than there are in summer. So plants in winter will receive less sunlight than plants in summer. So I can predict that plants will grow less in winter than they would in summer. Again, we had one hypothesis and we were able to make 5 different predictions. Okay, let's go back. Let me just move myself out of the way. Let's go back and evaluate the 3 claims made by the 3 friends that had never visited Scotland and saw that one black sheep. I want you to think about what is the evidence for them that enabled them to make these 3 claims. Is there enough of it? First claim being made, Scottish sheep are black. This statement really implies that all Scottish sheep are black. Second statement, some Scottish sheep are black. And finally, third statement, there's at least one sheep in Scotland, and that at least one side of that sheep is black. So pause the video and think again. What is the evidence that supports each of these statements? And is there enough of it? Can you tell which of these three statements really is a claim? And remember, a claim is something that is backed by evidence. It's a statement of truth. In order for you to make a statement of truth, it has to be backed by evidence. And what are the other two statements? Can we consider them as something else if they're not claims? If you examine these statements, this is what you probably noticed. Hypothesis and claim sound very similar. They both read and sound as statements of fact and truth. Now, the difference is that we make a claim after we gather sufficient data and analyze it. Sufficient, emphasis on sufficient. The data has to offer strong support, strong evidence for the statement. Whereas hypothesis is made before data is collected or before sufficient data is collected, before all data is collected. It's based on some data and some observations. And before we have sufficient data collected and analyzed, we make a hypothesis. Now, you don't need to have a hypothesis to be able to make a claim based on evidence, but let's go back to the three statements. And if we examine the evidence, what is the evidence? The three friends saw one sheep. Therefore, they cannot make the statement that all Scottish sheep are black because they only saw one. They only saw one sheep, so they cannot say some Scottish sheep are black. Why? For all they know, there's a single sheep in Scotland, not more than a single sheep. How do they know there's more than one sheep in England? They only saw one sheep. And finally, because they were traveling by train and they saw the sheep from the side, they only saw one side of the sheep. For all they know, the other side of the sheep could be white. Now, this may sound silly and unreasonable that you would have a sheep that is one half black and one half white, but you don't know that for a fact. You cannot make a claim that that sheep is black without having seen both sides of the sheep. Therefore, the only claim you can make is the last one. There's at least one sheep in Scotland because that's all we saw. But we cannot say there's only one sheep. We saw one, but there could be more. So there's at least one. And they saw one side of that sheep being black, so at least one of its side is black. The other one could be black or not. That's all we know. The other two statements are hypotheses. What would you need to do to say that some Scottish sheep are black? Well, you're going to have to see a lot more than one sheep and observe. Are they black on both sides? Are they white on both sides? Some of them are white, some of them are black. And you gather sufficient evidence, meaning you examine not just one sheep, but multiple sheeps. You can make the statement that, well, some Scottish sheep are black, some are not. Now, if you're going to make the statement that all Scottish sheep are black, that will require a lot more work because you're going to have to examine ideally every sheep in Scotland. But if you're not able to examine every sheep in Scotland, you're going to have to examine a large enough sample of the sheep population of Scotland to be able to say with some confidence that all Scottish sheep are black. Now we're going to be practicing distinguishing between predictions and hypotheses, since this is something we need to unlearn in this activity here. And we're going to be practicing writing claims based on evidence and throughout our course. But this is for now. I will see you next time when we're going to talk about how to make claims based on evidence and support them with reasoning. Bye for now.